Hi, you're listening to the Böll Europe podcast series on elections in 2025. My name is Joan Lanfranco, Head of Communications and Outreach at the EU and Global Dialogue Office of the Heinrich-Böll-Stiftung, the German Green Political Foundation. You can find out more about our work on eu.böll.org. The link is in the show notes. And don't forget to subscribe to stay updated on new episodes. Today, we focus on Czechia. On 3 and 4 October, Czechia elected a new parliament. The ANO party of Andrej Babiš won the elections with 34.5% of the votes. That's 80 out of 200 seats, and is likely to make a comeback in government after 4 years in opposition. From the outgoing government parties, the coalition Spolu and Mayors and Independent took a hit, whereas the Czech Pirate Party won 14 seats, up to a total of 18. These 18 seats include 2 from the Czech Greens, who returned to national parliament after 15 years. The big surprise was the breakthrough of the Motorists party, which won 13 seats. What does all this mean for Czech and regional politics and for the EU? In this episode, I talked with Adéla Jurečková, director of the Heinrich-Böll-Stiftung office in Prague, which covers Czechia, Slovakia and Hungary. We'll discuss about the election results, main topics, government formation, and implications for the EU. We will also discuss behavior and priorities of the electorate, support for Ukraine, and what to expect from Czechia's European policy. Hello, Adéla.
Hello.
Thanks so much for joining me today. So let's tackle the big picture first. Andrej Babiš won the elections. We want to know what's your main takeaway of the election results? What's your main reading of it?
Yeah, there are many takeaways already. First of all, of course, we have seen yet another political comeback of a populist leader in Central Europe. The ANO party of Andrej Babiš is the clear winner of this election with 34.5%. They are stronger than it was predicted in the polls. And the current government coalition, consisting of the Spolu coalition, 3 center-right parties, and the Mayor's party, they have clearly lost their majority. Spolu ended up with around 23%, the Mayors got around 11%, and the Pirate Party, who has been part of this government only until 2024, received 9%. This is, of course, not a great outcome from a green or liberal democratic point of view, but there are also some good news that I would like to share. And the biggest one, I would say, is that the extremist margins are much weaker at the end than expected. The left nationalist and strongly pro-Russian movement Stachilo, that has been built around members of the Communist Party, people from the disinformation scene, and a few social democrats did not pass the 5% threshold, and it was clearly expected that they will. Then also the support for the far-right party, that is also strongly pro-Russian and strongly anti-EU, called SPD, such as the German Social Democrats, but definitely different kind of party. They got lower support than expected. At the end, it's 7.8%. And another, from my point of view, less pleasant surprise of this election is that the Motorist party, could be translated with car drivers party, has been more successful than expected. It wasn't clear if they will enter the parliament. There is a 5% threshold. And many thought that they will miss the opportunity to enter the Czech parliament. But at the end, they entered with 6.8%, so kind of comfortably. And this party, as the name suggests, strongly opposes the phase out of the combustion engine and the Green Deal. It's economically quite neoliberal, and the party leader Filip Turek is one of the faces of the Czech manosphere environment online. So it's definitely not a party that, of course, from my point of view, is a good party to enter the Czech parliament and politics, but they are there and they are stronger than we thought. Babiš will most likely find some kind of agreement with the Motorists party and the far-right SPD. He needs them both for building a government, a majority. And the parties of the current coalition have declined a cooperation with Babiš. And also he promised his voters to remove the current government. So I think it's not very likely at this point that they would cooperate. One for me very positive and big surprise is that two Green candidates who have been running on the Pirates list from actually unelectable positions received so many preference votes from the voters that they climbed up the list and they enter parliament. So this is after 15 years, there will be two Green members of parliament in the Czech parliament, which is a great success for the party. One of them is the co-chair of the Czech Greens. And also another positive news is that there has been a huge success of female candidates in the preference voting. The candidate lists were still very male-dominated, and the voters used their opportunity with the preference votes to send two women up the list. So at the end, the Czech parliament will have the historically highest share of women, around 1/3. Interestingly, in the pre-election campaign, foreign policy has been a very important topic, but very simplistic in a way, West versus East. And it has been these both narratives have been very dominant. But the outcome, in fact, is, I think, to a large extent due to domestic concerns. The current government has been perceived as one that rather focuses on foreign policy issues and doesn't care enough for supporting people during the times of crises, as the cost of living, the energy price, inflation have heavily increased. And the government has done some cuts in public budgets, raised some taxes, while real wages have been significantly falling. And even if they are recovering right now, they are still back to the level of 2019. So it's still they have been falling really low. And some new data showed that the voter turnout that has been, by the way, the highest since the late 90s, has raised mostly due to higher participation of people from poorer districts and regions who have mostly supported the ANO party of Andrej Babiš. So definitely domestic issues and cost of living issues have been important.
So it could be partly a good news that the participation goes up, except that, well, it also favored, let's say, not so progressive views. And does this have to do with, besides the cost of living, with other sort of disenchantment with politics, or something a trend that you see in Czech politics in the last years? Or is it also a generational issue, for instance, that we should be seeing, we should be looking at?
I would say that more than a generational issue, it is an issue of center versus periphery gap that is definitely very visible in Czechia. So the people who supported ANO have been mostly from peripheries, which doesn't mean only the regions like on the borders of the country, but also sometimes the inner peripheries within cities, like the places that are where people live who have a lower standard of living, lower income, lower stages, formal stages of education, and in general lower chances to participate in society and see that democracy is really working for them. So definitely there has been a certain anti-system turn, but it hasn't been as strong as it could be, because these people had the decision to make because they didn't want the current government to stay. They wanted a change, but they could have decided to vote for more extreme parties that are really like anti-system, but they decided to give their vote to Babiš, who is definitely a populist and who definitely turned more to the right, but who still is kind of more moderate populist. So I think that this has been the biggest divisive line. And then, as you mentioned, yes, I think there is a strong tendency. Well, since many years, it's not new. It has just strengthened that people are disenchanted with democracy, with politics, with political parties, especially, but also the parliament and the government, whoever is part of the government at the very moment. So, yes, this is also a very horrifying tendency that can fuel populist and far-right parties.
And talking about populism and the fact that, our Prague office, which you head, also covers Slovakia, where Fico's government also is in place, or Orban since many years, and with elections next year, or with the comeback of Nawrocki in Poland, also neighbor country. Do you think that this return of Babiš is part of the same pattern? Is it different in Czechia than in those countries, or you actually see a common thread there?
There are definitely some parallels. When we take Slovakia, it was clear that the weakness of the democratic parties and their performance has fueled the comeback of the populists, especially in times of crisis. If governments fail to deliver a certain level of support and stability to the people who need it, the voters turn their back on them. But to be fair, I have to say that the support for the democratic mainstream party, who are pro-Western, pro-NATO, pro-EU, has not dramatically declined if we see the results of the election. Altogether, they have received similar numbers of votes as in 2021. But the difference has been made by the ability of Babiš to win over some voters from the anti-system camp, and also by, as I mentioned, the higher turnout of voters from marginalized peripheries. And I think the difference is really that, the populist is back because people really wanted a change. But the difference is that they still chose the option that is less extreme, and that is Andrej Babiš compared to the far-right SPD, who really got a weaker result than expected, and also the fact that the nationalist left, but also partly far-right party, Stachio, has not entered parliament.
So you mentioned that support for, so to say, foreign policy big issues, and one of the biggest issues is, of course, Ukraine. What do you expect of the return of a Babiš-led government when it comes to support to Ukraine, especially on military aid and by extension transatlantic relations?
Yeah, this comparison between Orban and Babiš, I think, is a bit too simplistic, even though they really have things in common. Babiš is clearly a populist who has moved further to the right in the last years. And he didn't do so because he would hold some ultra-conservative or far-right views himself, but simply he noticed that this rhetoric and this way of doing politics is currently gaining momentum. And this change in his positioning has clearly manifested in the transition of the ANO party from the Renew fraction to the Patriots for Europe in the European Parliament, where he now sits alongside with Orban, Kikel, or Le Pen. On the other hand, I think it's not completely correct and especially not very helpful to paint Babiš as the new Orban in the making, because first of all, Babiš is acting much less ideologically. He is very pragmatic, and he definitely does not care about turning Czechia into a ultra-conservative country. I think his style could be described as managerial populism. He wants to be seen as a good manager, a skilled deal maker, and someone who is influential and who is respected. So I would say if we want to use these kind of comparisons, he could rather be seen as a Czech Trump minus the MAGA movement than a Czech Orbán. And in his first government, Babiš has really enjoyed bragging with having the phone numbers of Macron and of other EU leaders in his phone and being in good terms with them. So I think that is actually a chance and something to build on for EU leaders if they want to keep Czechia under Babiš as part of the club. But you also raised the question of Ukraine and the support, especially military support for Ukraine. And that is indeed a topic that has been heavily discussed in the pre-election campaign. And Babiš and also his likely coalition partners or supporters, all of them have promised to reduce or even stop Czechia's support for Ukraine. Babiš himself said that the NATO 5% of GDP target for military spendings is too high, and that the money was more needed for domestic policies and social policies. He also suggested to end the Czech ammunition initiative that supports Ukraine. So this is something to be afraid of. On the other hand, directly after the election, his rhetoric has already changed. So now Babiš talks about the need to reform this ammunition initiative, to make it more transparent so that certain arm manufacturers don't take too much profit from it. So it's quite a different argument that he's been using before the election. And yeah, as we know so far, Babiš is known for being able to change his positions very quickly and quite fundamentally. So I think we need more time, and especially we have to wait how his government will look like, who his coalition partners will be or his supporters.
I will retain that equation that you mentioned. So it's Trump minus the MAGA movement. So that would help us understand Babiš. And thanks for that insight. So looking ahead, what do you think our EU audience, particularly in Brussels, in the institutions that have to deal with the new government, have to retain? What style of politics we will see? Also, when it comes to European cooperation, at key topics coming up next, such as the new EU budget, the multi-annual financial framework. Can you give us 2 or 3 things to expect from this government on EU policy?
Yes. All the 3 parties that are now talking about forming a government, which means Andrej Babiš, but also the Motorists and the far-right SPD, all these parties have clearly rejected the phase-out of the combustion engine, and they have heavily criticized the Green Deal. So it is clear that they will try to push against all kind of progressive climate policies. Also, they have been raising the Pact on Migration and Asylum as something that is not acceptable. And it has been also criticized by all the 3 parties. And I think it's a largely symbolic rhetoric, of course. Like if something is called the Pact on Migration and comes from the EU, it must be rejected. And it does not have much to do with what's actually inside the pact, and that it does not contain very liberal immigration policies. But I think here we need to expect definitely some pressure. Also, the civil society is preparing for what's coming after the elections. They have been working with different scenarios. And the first danger for democracy that they have identified is that the parties speak about reforming the public service media. And this means that it would probably be the first area where independent, crucial democratic institutions could be a danger. We have also heard some harsh statements about NGOs during the pre-election campaign. And I think they could face further verbal attacks, but also some attempts to cut down their financing, especially organizations dealing with green and progressive agendas and focusing on advocacy and awareness raising. So I think this is another area where we can see some pushback. But despite all this, I think the best strategy for Berlin and Brussels towards Babiš, and at least now at the start or soon at the start of his government, is rather engagement than isolation, because Babiš does not want to draw the country closer to Russia. He wants to keep it in the EU and aligned with its Western partners, and he wants to be taken seriously by them. So I think giving him a chance rather than turning their backs on him could be the key to preserving Czechia's pro-EU and pro-Western orientation. But, and that's important, at the same time, EU representatives should keep their eyes and ears open for what civil society voices from Czechia have to tell them, and if necessary, show a quicker and more clear reaction than it has been in the case of Hungary for many years. And even after in Hungary, the civil society and democracy itself has been heavily attacked, like not much happened for a long time. And I think this should not happen in case of Czechia. If this really will happen, I'm not expecting it, or at least not soon. But it's definitely important to watch it closely and be prepared to react.
We will definitely watch it closely. We will follow what happens next in the Czech Republic. But we thank you very much, Adéla, for joining us. I think it's been very illustrative of what's going on. And thank you very much, and hope to see you soon.
Thank you. See you soon.
You've been listening to the Böll Europe podcast on the results of the Czech elections with Adéla Jurečková from our Prague office. You can find more analysis and updates on the Czech election results in the show notes and on our website eu.böll.org. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with your friends and colleagues. Until next time, goodbye!